Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luer, and I'm excited to travel all the way to Boston, Massachusetts today to catch up with Mr. John West. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to our conversation here in the next hour and exploring, your interesting background and of course your role in the world of sports now. And let me just sort of quickly do a quick intro here for folks who might not know you. I like your headline in your LinkedIn profile. It says you're a passionate and committed entrepreneur, and this being the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast, of course, that's already a perfect fit right there. And you've obviously had a very entrepreneurial career, started several businesses, sold several of them, and we'll obviously hear a bit about that later. And then we're going to spend, really about Team Whistle, the Whistle Sports Company, which you founded about 10, 12 years ago, which is, in the simplest description, I guess, is as a platform, as a digital play for scripted, unscripted content, podcast, and many other things, social media driven environments with over 4 billion monthly video views now globally. So I don't want to jump too far ahead there. We're going to go much deeper into that later, but it looks like an exciting business. Again, recently teamed up with the 11 company with our buddy Andrea, and we'll talk about all that. But before we go there, as I said, let's go back how it all started, coming out of university, studying engineering, and if I sort of read this correctly, it was you were working in another group, but maybe didn't quite get along with the founders and decided you can do this better yourself. But what's your version of that?
Yeah, that's fairly close. I went to a tiny school in Massachusetts called Worcester Polytechnic, which was an engineering school, right. And got my degree in engineering. And while I went to school, the sport that I did was rowing, and I fell in love with rowing. Okay. And my rowing coach had started an environmental engineering company. Right. And I worked part-time to pay for some of my school with him. And when I graduated, he gave me an offer. So I liked him, took the job, was there for about a year, and had an idea for how we could expand his business. Right. So I wrote a 3-page business plan, did some research, gave it to him, and he just didn't get it, didn't like it. I tried a few times. I said, listen, I think there's a big opportunity here. The law just changed in Massachusetts. There's a whole new market. There's no one there yet. We can go get the head start. Right. He didn't see it. So I said, I was very upfront, said, listen, I'm going to leave and try this on my own. Yeah. So I called my dad up. He let me max out a $5,000 credit card. I bought a computer and lived in his basement for 3 years and started a company, which is now called Enstrat, that did environmental engineering, which was soil and groundwater and fixing environmental problems for about 7 years. Yeah. That's amazing.
Again, let's get a sense. You coming out of university, which means you were early 20s here, or
yeah, I was 22.
Right. Okay.
22.
Right. Okay. Awesome. So that was your first company. Now, I believe you sold the business, or what was how did Enstrat? Where is it? It's still around, right? I believe.
Still around. 28 years. So I about 3 or 4 years into that, I realized that most of my friends from college were engineers, and I was a lot more interested in the business side of things. I ended up hiring engineers at my company, and I did the business development and sales and that stuff. So I didn't really have too many friends who I could talk to business about, and I decided to go get my MBA. I applied to Harvard. Didn't actually think I'd get in, but what am I going to lose? So I applied. Right. Surprisingly got in. It was during a 3-year period where they did not take the standardized typical MBA test, like a GMAT, like an SAT. Mm-hmm. I'm horrible at standardized tests. So anyway, I got lucky. I got in. I did that for 2 years. So, when I was on campus doing my classes, I go back and do work and back and forth. Okay. And then when I graduated from Harvard, the environmental engineering industry was beginning to be heavily regulated by the U.S. government, and I just did not want to have a business where the government could change a regulation and throw your whole business upside down. So a year after I graduated, I sold it to the number 2 guy in my company, at the time
right.
at Enstrat, and
moved on.
Made a little money and moved to New York. Slept on a friend's couch, and then joined a consulting firm for a few years.
Yeah. Let's talk about Michell Management Group. It's a management consulting group again, and you're saying it's in New York, so I'm sure there's lots of experiences and learnings on the back of that. Give us a quick look into that 3-4 years you were there.
Yeah, it was fascinating for me personally because I'd never really spent time in New York City, so that was a great learning curve. And Michell Madison was a brand new consulting firm that was founded by partners from McKinsey and A.T. Kearney. And they focused on helping large companies with operations and cost cutting and financial things. And I joined, I think there were 150 people when I joined, and they grew to about 1,200 people in 3 years.
Wow.
And they had 15 offices around the world. So it's just a great
massive
opportunity
growth,
massive growth, a lot of change. I did projects all over the world. So just a great exposure for me. I got to go present to CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And then after about 3 years, I was elected partner. And right as that happened, they decided to sell the company. And I had an idea in my head for about a year that I'd been kind of working on, and decided not to go with the new company and leave and start my second company, which was Silver Oak.
Round two here. Yeah, I love that. It definitely sounds there's some similarities, right, to the first round here. But now you beefed up with a Harvard degree. You've done your management consulting, and again, from what you just said about what Michell was doing, there was a bit about that already. What you then launched after it, which was called the Silver Oak Solutions company. And you were doing spend management, and I think you had a term they called PRISM. Why don't you explain a little bit what that means, really, and what exactly you guys were doing?
Yeah, so PRISM was a piece of software that we developed. A lot of what we did at Michell Madison was helping companies spend their money, large companies that were decentralized and lots of divisions, coordinate and spend their money more, better. But a lot of it was not automated. So part of my idea for Silver Oak was to have a piece of software that would automate getting the data, to be able to evaluate the opportunities, and then having another piece that was going consulting and negotiating with vendors to get better prices. So that was the premise for Silver Oak when we started. The initial client base was private equity firms. And at the time, most private equity firms in the U.S. anyway didn't have any internal operational teams, which most of them now do. So they would own 25 different companies, and the 25 different companies would all go buy their computers and office supplies and health insurance and all that stuff in 25 different ways. Yeah. So we had the software that would take data from each of the companies, show us where the overlaps were, and then we had a team that would go negotiate better pricing. So we started out with private equity firms, and then a friend of mine at the time was the treasurer of the state of Delaware, a small state. But he said, could you do this for our state? Because we have 130 departments and don't really coordinate. Right. So as a test, we did it. It worked tremendously well. We saved the state hundreds of millions of dollars. Wow. And then we quickly kind of jumped into that and did 13 other states. And we got to a point where we had a reputation and were approached by a public company based in Canada, but global, called CGI. And they made an offer to acquire us, and we did negotiation and accepted. It took about 7 years.
Love it. Now, this is sort of, again, just to give people a sense here, we're talking about, I think you started the company in 1999 and the exit year is in 2007. So, there is obviously a little bit of dot-com boom and bust as well, which doesn't sound like it affected you because you guys were more on the tech side of it, right? You had a platform, right? A software which was running systems on the back end, so it wasn't really that linked to the internet world yet, was it? Or
Correct. No, it wasn't. software,
right.
pure software.
Yeah, amazing. And again, so you obviously you really grew the company from, as you said, from that small first idea to then you had offices across the region. And I guess the interesting part, really, what I remember reading about it was that you guys were looking at billions and billions of dollars of these transactions, right, these large spending companies have, and then figuring out how, I guess, to optimize them and save money and all that stuff in between, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. And so you're getting paid a fee, I guess, is it? That's how what was the business model there, or are you get
some... Our fee was a retainer plus percentage of savings.
Right. Okay.
So the more we saved them, the better we did.
Yeah. Nice. Well. So you ended up with your second exit, so to speak. I'm assuming the second one was quite a bit larger than the first one, but another nice take as an entrepreneur in the box here. Now, what do you do then? Because how do you get from there to Team Whistle? I'd love to hear that one.
Yep. So we sold the company in 2005. I had a 2-year contract to manage the integration, which I did. Realized after 2 years I did not want to work for a 25,000 person public company, and was very frustrated with the bureaucracy that I had to deal with, a lot of the time. Even though it was a great company, it wasn't me. So at the time, my wife and I were living in Boston, had just had our second child. And I think I was averaging 400,000 miles a year in the air flying around.
Wow.
Between our offices and now CGI's offices. So I was gone a lot, and just was burned out, frankly. So the day that the 2 years came up in my contract, I resigned. I remember vividly going home, putting my Microsoft PC and BlackBerry in the drawer in my home office, turning them off and closing the drawer. And and my goal was to take a year off and figure out what's next. Right. And in that time, I really became a much more active father and saw the world through my young kids' eyes. Mm-hmm. And my young kids were just getting into Little League baseball. I'm a big Red Sox fan in Boston. Right. So I was taking them to games. We were going to the field and trying, practicing. And in the morning, my ritual was I would come downstairs and have my cereal and watch ESPN. Sports Center and get the news of the day on sports. And at the time, there's always those sort of 7 drop-down screens on the left of the TV screen on ESPN that were, the story of the day and the next story coming up. And it was 4 or 5 of them every single day were scandals. Right. It was the time when Tiger Woods was going through his issues. It was Penn State in the U.S. was going through a lot of issues. So there were a lot of U.S. sports scandals going on, and they were being, in my opinion, overreported by the sports media news cycle. And it just wasn't what I wanted my kids to. So I would shut the TV off when my kids woke up and came down. And it just kind of got me thinking. When I was a kid, sports were so important to the development of my character. I played soccer. I played tennis when I was younger. Then I got into rowing. And it really defined a lot about me. And understanding physicality and how to eat well and math and science and teamwork and persistence and all the stuff that sports does in the right way. I didn't see my kids getting through sports media. Right. And at the same time, I also saw that they weren't watching TV the way that I did growing up, right? They weren't coming home from school at 3:00 and waiting for their favorite show at 4:00 and putting that on. They were on the computers at the time. And then when the iPhone came out, they took my wife's iPhone. They were on the iPhone. They were watching media when they wanted to, where they wanted to, how they wanted to.
Absolutely.
And I just didn't see that in traditional media. So that idea kind of got stuck in my head for about a year. And then this was 2007. And then, so I basically started reading books. I didn't know anything about media at all, but I started reading books. One of the things I got from both HBS and the consulting firm was just how to kind of quickly understand an industry and what the metrics were and how it worked. And so I decided to try and understand media and sports media. And so I started networking. I got on a plane, and I met 3 people who were just instrumental in the launch of Whistle. First was Jerry Laybourne, who ran Nickelodeon and created Nickelodeon into a cash cow for Viacom at the time, which was a kids' TV channel in the U.S., very popular. Brilliant media executive still. She also started and launched and sold Oxygen Media with Oprah Winfrey. So Jerry Laybourne, Mark Lazarus. Mark ran Turner Sports. He now runs half of NBC, but he shortly after we met ran NBC Sports. Super nice guy, really smart. At the time, he had 3 teenagers. So when I would explain this to him, he's like, yeah, I get it. My kids are on their phones. They're not watching live sports the way they used to. I mean, it's a very different world coming up. Right. And then the last person was a guy named Don Tapscott. And Don is a researcher in Toronto. And at the time, in 2009, he wrote a book called Grown Up Digital. And the premise of the book, someone emailed me the link, and I ordered it and got it and read it overnight, and then called him and went up and took him out for dinner. The premise of the book was that there's this generation of young folks that are growing up in this digital world, right, and they are digital natives. Yep. And as hard as we may try as parents or older people, we're always going to be digital immigrants, and we're not really going to understand their world. And so seeing my younger kids, and now I have 3, we had a daughter, so I've got 2 boys and a daughter who are all teenagers, seeing the media world and the sports media world through their eyes over the past decade has been just fascinating to me. And Whistle has the research department and a data department. So we do there's a lot of data supporting just the antidotes that I see at home. So basically the idea for Whistle was to simplify it. And I got 3 of those people on my advisory board and decided to incorporate in 2008. And we actually did research for 4 years. Wow. To try and understand this, because we knew that kids were leaving TV. We didn't quite know where they were going. At the time, the internet, obviously they go online, right? But that's a big, crazy, changing place. And then in 2000, so we started raising money, started hiring people. We officially came up with a business model in early 2013. And then we officially launched on January 1st, 2014, our first channel on YouTube. Wow. But for us, it was this belief that the summary of the business was sort of ESPN meets Nickelodeon, even though our audience is now older. But the belief was that in the U.S., when I grew up, I'm 55, so there were 3 broadcast channels, and you could watch sports between 2 and 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. That was pretty much it. Right. And then the technology disruption of cable and satellite came along in 1979, and all of a sudden there's 500 channels. Right. And now you've got 10 sports channels, and you can watch sports 24/7. Yep. And so that technology shift way that you could experience media, we felt at Whistle that the combination of social media technology disruption combined with mobile phone video capability, both watching and creating, those 2 things were going to fundamentally shift media. Right. And so that was the early premise. That was the premise, right. To play out. And, and the world was going from a one-to-many broadcasting model in media to a many-to-many broadcasting model, where my son will take his iPhone, go in the backyard, try and do a trick shot, take a video, put a soundtrack on it, upload it to his YouTube channel, share it with his friends. They would share with their friends. Yep. I mean, that was a huge portion of his media diet every day. Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. So I love this. That was a premise. And I want to definitely dig a bit more deeper, of course, in exactly what you guys are doing now. But before we go there, I want to go back to what you just said earlier in terms of that you did 4 years worth of research, which in the world we're talking about here, which is so fast moving, that's an awful long time before you get a product on the market, in my view, and I'm not saying it's wrong. Obviously, you guys were hugely successful with it, which proved the point. But, you see a lot of times, and that's why I'd love to just get your thoughts on it, why and how, people have an idea, and as you said, whether they bring money along themselves or they raise it quickly with some friends, and then they're out, right? And then you're testing, and it's sort of, the Mark Zuckerberg stories, right, of how they launched Facebook. You kind of obviously did a very different process here. Just is that because of your consulting background or other things where you felt you guys weren't quite ready, or what was it? Talk me through those 4 years a little bit. Yeah, it's a great question. As I look back, I think that the first 2 years were frankly me learning about media.
Right.
Because I couldn't spell media when I had this idea in my head.
That was in your background. Yeah, I get that.
Right. So I had to understand the industry. I literally, again, networked, flew around, took Mark Lazarus to lunch in Atlanta, took Jerry Laybourne to dinner in New York. I mean, went to LA a couple times. So I was flying around trying to meet people that I could learn from and get their response to this idea. I never forget, I had a dinner with Jerry Laybourne, who's become a dear friend and just absolutely brilliant. And she said to me two things. She said, first of all, she said, you have two huge advantages. She said, I don't think this is going to work. Media is hard to start. The road is littered with failed media companies. Yeah. But she said, you have two huge advantages. The first is you're starting this with a white, clean sheet of paper. Right. So you're not worried about cannibalizing the linear revenue stream or dealing with quarterly profit pressures of a public company. So that's an advantage if you can figure out the business model. She said the second thing is, and at the time I was a little put off, but in hindsight I realized it was a compliment. She said, you're just ignorant enough about this industry to start this company.
Yeah.
So I think there was a 2-year learning curve for me personally.
Right.
The next 2 years we did some experimentation. We initially, believe it or not, the initial premise was we'll launch a cable channel because that's a knowable thing that we can figure out.
Right.
We didn't ultimately, and then we'll launch a website. And so we actually launched a website. We hired a consulting firm, launched a website. Gen Z, which is 21 and under, and young millennials, the lower half of millennials, really aren't going to websites today. So the website didn't do very well. And then we launched, back in the day, there was a thing called the Microsoft Live channel on Xbox. So we spent a lot of time in Seattle. We negotiated the deal for that. We launched that and realized that it was a very difficult thing to find and download, and our demographic, which at the time was sort of 13 to 21, just really wasn't going there. Right. So we experimented in a few things, and then really what changed in 2013 was that we saw in discussions we were having with early social media platforms like Facebook, we saw they were going to get into video. There was no video on Facebook in 2012, 2013. None. It was all pictures and links. Text. So when we heard they were going to get into Facebook, going to get into video, and then and video was always our premise, right? It's always going to be video. We're not going to do live sports. We couldn't afford the rights. We're going to do everything around sports, right? We're going to do player interviews, team backgrounds, trick shots, fun stuff you do at home. It's going to be sports lifestyles, we called it.
It's all USG, right? User-generated content, right?
At the time it was, we didn't do any original programming at the time. Right now we do a lot of it, but it was all USG. And but really it was social media adopting video. As soon as that happened, we found the business model. And that's when we really started raising money and ramped up the company. And, we had an office in New York, but we opened one in LA and in London, and now we have one in Charlotte. So that was really a pivotal moment for us. And then beyond that, so we started on YouTube, and all of a sudden Facebook gets into video. And then back then there was this thing called Vine, which was kind of the TikTok of today.
Right.
But then all these other platforms started popping up. So we basically built a team of young 25-year-olds who were experts on these platforms, and decided as a distribution strategy we were going to go on every social media platform we could get on globally.
Makes
which
sense.
We are on.
And now again, I looked around it, but I'm not sure I really was able to fully grasp this yet. So currently you are almost up to 1,655 channels, I guess, to be accurate on what it says on your website.
Yep.
Now I'm assuming they all have different names. They're not called Team Whistle, I'm sure, right? They're all this, that, and the other. So how does it work? You guys just create names. So this is for skateboarding and surfing and God knows what, any other sort of interesting activities, or how do you guys categorize it, or make any sense out of that?
So we started, to your comment, back to UGC. The first version of our business was, and in hindsight, this will sound really planned out and organized. It wasn't at all. We were just trying to figure things out. But we started at the time by recruiting the biggest social media influencer in the US, which is a group of guys called Dude Perfect.
Okay.
Which are still tremendous partners of ours.
Right.
And so the first, back in the US at the time, there was a model called an MCN, multi-channel network.
Right.
And we, and that was the first phase of our business. And what we felt was we recruit influencers that do sports lifestyle stuff. We partner with them. We help them grow.
Right.
We help them with money. We have a sales team that brings in brands and advertisers and helps them make money. We do help them with production. We help them distribute off of the singular platform that they're on, which most of them at the time was just YouTube. So we help them get on Facebook and other platforms. So we provide value to them. And what we get from that is data.
Right.
We understand what videos work well on what platforms, what the retention rate is, what the engagement rate is, what the share rate is, all the data. And this is where my engineering came back into play, because honestly, when we started this, I did not think I would be CEO for 12 or 13 years. But when this became a very different type of media business, data-driven media business, it did fit my skill set a little bit better. So we started with the influencers, and I think we partnered now with about 500.
Okay.
And then and we helped them grow. And so it was a win-win. And then as we got this tremendous database, we launched in 2016, 17, an original content team.
Okay.
So then we started to create our own content that we owned and distributed. So I think of the 1,600 channels, probably 200 are what we call Whistle O&O, which is content that is our brands. We own it. We can put it on different places. We can monetize it in different ways.
Right.
And we still continue to work with our social influencer partners. And in many cases, they're talent in our videos because their audiences are tremendous. We did some research recently in the US, and for under 25-year-olds, we asked for likability between Dude Perfect, Tom Brady, and LeBron James.
Right.
And
Dude
Perfect
won
by far.
Wow.
Won by far.
Wow.
So this whole new generation, and the reason is that they've been brought up in a world where they can relate to the people that they watch, and it's hard to relate to a pro athlete, especially the other great ones like Tom Brady, whom I'm a big fan of. It's hard to relate to them. With Dude Perfect, they do a video, you post a comment, they comment back. Right?
Yeah.
There's a
super
conversation. It's natural, and so that has become what this young generation wants from their media. They don't want a post-game press conference that's staged and the athletes really can't say what they feel. They've got to say what they're supposed to say, right? They want natural feedback. So I think the younger pro athletes coming up are a lot more attuned to social media, so that'll change. But so there was a relatability. And the other thing that I'll mention is that we also I felt from the beginning, one of the tenets of the company was we're not going to go to scandal. We're not going to go negative. It's going to be, our content is positive. It's relatable to this young generation, and it's inspiring, and it's definitely funny. I mean, funny is a big part of it, but it's not laugh at you funny. It's laugh with you funny. Right. So the common theme, we have 50 original series now that are across all 7 major social media networks that do phenomenal views. And the common theme, those 4 tenets in the content, and that we found that certainly centennials and the lower end of millennials really relate to that. They are tired of the controversy and scandals that dominate their parents' media and sports media. Yep. They just want to have fun and learn, obviously, follow their sports heroes, but in a very different way.
Love it. And now everything is making real complete sense now. As I said, but even after I was doing some homework on it, I wasn't sure I could really visualize what exactly all the things you guys were doing. But now it's super clear. Now, again, let's go step a bit back for a minute here. That sort of model, I'm assuming, is initially, as you said, you partnering with these influencers, and then you sort of make some money together, right? There's probably revenue share models and all this usual thing, right?
Yep. Yep. That's exactly it.
Yeah, and that's not always that easy, right? That's you're sharing a pie of a pie and so on. So I'm assuming a bit. It probably took a bit of time before the revenue streams were getting large enough that you weren't constantly putting more money in it, but you were also, from what I see, that you were constantly raising money, right? You raised $100 million, is I think what's out there publicly. So, was that needed to sustain it, or was it you were using it more because you saw these massive growth opportunity? There's obviously a little different to it.
Yeah, it was definitely the latter. It was growth. And
right.
So we raised 4 rounds of capital, about $110 million in total.
Mm-hmm.
Series A in 2011. It was about every 2.5 years we did the Series A, B, C, D.
Okay.
And we did it because we put the pieces together. So initially the Series A was, let's do this multi-channel network thing. Let's get some great influencers. We took typically 20% of the revenue, but we had we built a sophisticated sales team that could go out and bring a lot more revenue to these creators than they could get on their own.
Right.
It wasn't just that pre-roll video. It was branded content, native advertising, whatever you call it. But it was, there was an interest in that. Just to give you perspective, Dude Perfect today, when we started, when they were our first partner in January 1st, 2014, they had 2 million YouTube followers, subscribers, people who reached in and subscribed to follow them, which means that when they launch a new video, you get a notification on your YouTube channel.
Right.
So it's a very engaged audience. It's not a passive TV audience. It's like clicking through channels.
Yeah.
Today, they have 55 million YouTube subscribers, and they have another 50 million on the other social media platforms. So they have over 100 million avid, engaged fans.
Yeah.
And because of that, any brand who wants to sell anything to anyone under 25 or 30, sees a huge opportunity to get involved with them and do a really fun video that includes their product if it's the right fit creatively, or do advertising. So, initially, the capital raise. So initially it was, okay, let's get this audience, let's get the data. Number one priority for us, get the data on what's working on what platforms. And let's do it with our partners who are successful social media influencers. And let's understand why they're being successful. Because they're just kind of doing videos, and some of them went viral and some didn't. Why is that? How do we decode that? There's an algorithm to figure that out.
Right.
So that was the first round of capital. Second round of capital was we started to bring in revenue, and then we had to build the sales team out to really ramp that up. The third round of capital was original content. So once we had enough data and a strong perspective around what worked within the parameters of our creative guidelines on the 4 areas I just mentioned, how do we begin to own some of our data? And our goal has never been to completely, like traditional media, we don't need to own all the data. Own all the content. We want to have the data for all the content, but we want to own some of the content. And our goal is kind of 50-50, and that's pretty much where we're at now.
Right.
And then the fourth round was just, okay, we've got revenues coming in, and then it was diversification. So we, in the last 2 years, launched Whistle TV, which is, we're on, I believe, about 100 million connected TVs in the United States right now, in 100 million households, for Whistle TV, because we realized some of our audience had grown up over the past 10 years, and they were watching a little bit of connected TV, so why not play there too?
So you went back to the original idea, huh? When you mentioned earlier.
A little bit. That's not anywhere near as big as the social media audience we have. But
of course.
We decided to play there. So it was investing in, but it was diversifying revenue. So we have revenue now from selling merchandise across our sort of 50 shows. And to your earlier question, which I thought was a good one, it's not we don't think in this world of media where someone has infinite choices of content, and that it's about one brand. It's about Whistle or 11, or we think it's really about brands that resonate. So we have I believe the second most viewed show on Snap right now. It's called Brother. And Snap is a huge and growing platform for us. We have a really popular show that's been on a variety of platforms called No Days Off. So, owning original content, having the brands stand on those sub-brands, I guess you'd say, stand on their own, and then selling merchandise around the sub-brand. And then there's one brand we have called Dunk League that we're in the process of setting up a series of events. So as the world comes back, hopefully to live events, we'll be active in that. So it's just really it's using the data to find what's engaging the audience on social media, extending that to other media platforms. So, we've been on a variety of digital and linear platforms as well. And then figuring out the 10 different ways you can monetize that.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it makes complete sense. And but before we come into some of your acquisitions, I'd love to really get into there as well. I want to stick for one more minute on so currently you have, from, again, the numbers I've seen, you have about over 600 million aggregated social media audiences. That means these are the followers, I guess, across all the channels and the influencers you guys will work with. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so of that, and then you have, let's say, over 4 billion monthly views, and about half, maybe half in the US, and the other half comes from around the world. Which are the other big regions where that content resonates? Is it other English-speaking markets, or it is really truly global, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's great question. It's we have large market in the UK, large markets in Europe, a little bit in Asia, Japan. We're hoping part of our interest in partnering with 11 was to get their help expanding more into Asia. We haven't really gone into Latin America yet. Right. But what we've two things we learned early on in the data that we saw was that young sports fans are global. Mm-hmm. Like when I grew up, I couldn't follow any sports team outside of the town I lived in, just because that's what the media, that's the regionality of media at the time. My sons are huge fans of Leeds United, for obvious reasons, but also, also because they love soccer, football, and so and so very few times they actually watch the TV set in our family room. It's for things like Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. NBC usually puts on a Premier League game, and when Leeds is on, they're watching it. They're partly watching it, and they're also on their phones, but at least they're kind of sitting there on the couch with me. Yeah. But so they're global sports fans, and secondly, a lot of our content is not related to the specific language that it's viewed in. So half of the 600 million is outside the U.S. and half of our views are outside the U.S. And a lot of it's in English-speaking countries, but some of it's not. And it's because it's if there's a trick shot video with a great soundtrack, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter who.
Yeah, it is content which translates without the language. Absolutely.
Absolutely, and I think sport does that, and it's wonderful for me personally to see that dynamic and to see the world, the great sports of the world open up to, my kids in the U.S. and their friends in the U.S. So that's been a wonderful, sort of development in the last.
And again, I mean, just thinking out loud here, expanding your business model, work. It's nowadays just means find some Spanish-speaking influencers, find some whatever Chinese-speaking influencer or Indian speakers, to then duplicate it and of course, therefore expand it isn't that hard, right? Because you had the model in place now, right? It's just now.
That's exactly the premise. And when I met Andrea Raversani 5 years ago at a conference in Monaco, that was exactly what we talked about.
Yeah, exactly.
So
scaling is becomes easy now. That's for sure. Or on the back of it, the way you look at it.
Yeah, we've got the model, and obviously country by country is different, as you know, but we're optimistic that we can now quickly scale to on a country by country basis.
Yeah, agree. Now let's talk a bit about your acquisitions. And you had, there's 3 companies from what I've seen, right? Vertical Networks, Newform, and Tiny Horse. All all slightly different companies, but I guess sort of fitting into the overall model and overall picture. Maybe just touch a bit on all of them a bit and what you guys did and how they fit into the strategy.
Yeah. So part of the use of funds for our last round, our Series D, was acquisitions, and as we got to a scale where we were getting approached and we could look out at smaller companies and think about M&A. We had our map of companies we were interested in, got to know over the years, and So part of the funds were used in the Series D for that. But the first one was Newform. And Newform, it was a studio in LA that did scripted content. And a lot of it was not sports. And one of the interesting things we saw in the data was that this young generation, and when I say that again, it's I'm kind of 13 to 25 is the age range. Mm-hmm. They were not as interested in singular genres. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. We did a show for YouTube called Finding Football. Original content they paid us for. There were two really funny and talented soccer football players in the UK, and they go under the banner F2 on YouTube. Really nice guys, really well-rounded. So we did a show called Finding Football, which was, we took them to 8 cities around the world. The show was, and they do football freestyle trick shot stuff. Mm-hmm. And the show was part travel show. So we'd explore, through their eyes, right? We'd explore this, they were the talent. We'd explore the city a little bit. Right. We would explore the food in the city, and they'd see what they liked and didn't like. We usually found a local musician to partner with us in this. So it was a music piece to it. Mm-hmm. And the core was obviously football and their skills, and they do these amazing trick shots. Yeah. That's 4 different genres. And so what we realized was that a lot of the videos that were being watched wasn't just watch a sports game or, watch a music video. It was these combinations.
Bringing things together.
So
makes total sense.
That was a bit of and I think it originates from, back to the story of my kids. Again, they go take a video with their friends, they goof around, they add a filter to it with their iPhone, they add a soundtrack to it. They may add different motion characteristics to it, but it's not just a straight on simple video of one thing shooting another, right? It's correct. There's a lot of different parts to it. So anyway, Newform did scripted content. They were really highly regarded small studio in LA. Mm-hmm. Ron Howard and Discovery owned most of it. ITV owned a piece. And they just got to a point where it was hard for them to scale on their own. Mm-hmm. So we approached them and said, be part of us. We want to get into more original content. Right. And scripted is a piece of that, and we don't have that skill set. So that was the logic between that for that acquisition.
Makes sense.
And then about 6 months later, we acquired a company called Vertical Network, which was owned by Liz Murdoch and Snap. Mm-hmm. And Snap, by this time, had become a really good partner of ours. They were engaging exactly the audience we wanted to engage, and they were doing it in phenomenally smart ways, we thought. And Vertical Networks had some great shows on Snap. So for us, that was just a way to really massively and quickly increase our presence on Snap. And same logic. I went and met with Liz Murdoch in London. It's, we can help you scale. We can get your company to the next level. So come be part of us. And every one of the 3 deals had a large equity partner. So we wanted them to go with us.
Yeah, and you just mentioned Liz Murdoch here. You have a fairly illustrious group of investors, right? Liberty Global, Snap is in there, Discovery, NBC, Jeff Katzenberg. You have some footballers and sports star, Derek Jeter and Peyton Manning. How do they all show up? Is it just they're also come across what you guys are doing, they're fans of it, and then end up being investors, or you targeted them specifically and had a way to get in front of them? How do you find these sort of high profile guys?
Yeah, 2 parts to that. Two parts to that answer. The first is that I have flown a little quiet time during the pandemic to go back and look at some records, and I've flown 3.2 million miles in the last 12 years. Right. So they would have come to me, but yeah, for meetings, right? For meetings, and a lot of my job was fundraising, so and investor relations. What amazed me from the beginning was that the idea of positive sports-related content for this new generation resonated with so many people. And so I just, one door opened another. Again, I knew none of these people prior to launching Whistle. And, a lot of funny backstories. But I got to Jerry Laybourne because her husband was involved with a thing called the Wedding Channel, and the Wedding Channel filmed my wedding, and he was there, and I met him. And then when I, 6 years earlier, and then when I decided to do this, I called him, and he's like, "You got to meet my wife, Jerry." So I went there. Jerry, after we got to know each other and she joined our advisory board, made a few calls, and she called a guy named Bob Pittman, who's a very well-known media executive in the U.S., and Bob invested, and then he made a call. And so we just got, it just was a daisy chain of people liking the idea at the end of the day. And then when we started to execute, there was something they could see, and they liked what they saw. It's funny, I went back and looked across 187 investors, and I almost we have some institutional, Sky and NBC and Liberty, et cetera. But for the individual folks, almost to a person, they either have teenage kids or teenage grandkids. And so they could relate to, wow, my kids are watching media differently. There's something here.
Absolutely.
And
I have kids at the same age too, so everything you're saying I can completely relate to, especially the part about how they like to mix the stuff. Like my son is a gamer. He's a sports guy too, but he's a gamer, but he loves watching food stuff. Can't ask me why. He likes watching how people cook, which it makes no sense to me at all. But that's how they do it. It's an interesting mix, and that's how they're engaged. So I completely get it. He does some streaming. He's a bit of a YouTuber there, or wants to be one, and it's fun. I love watching it, and I can very much relate to it. Everything you just said. So now, since we're sort of coming a little bit also to the closing finish line here, but of all the fun stuff you guys are doing. So. Yeah, company's growing amazing, and I think everyone has been listening here or will be listening can understand now really what you're doing, and I can see how you're looking to scale around the world. Why did you do the deal with 11? And you mentioned a bit earlier already, but maybe we'll go a little deeper now in it. Why would you sell the company at this stage? Is there the investors some of them looking for an exit, or you just felt it was the right time, or is it not really a sale? It's it's another form. How maybe unpack that a little bit? Yeah.
So in October of last year, I took my one plane flight of the year, and I flew to Milan, Italy, to meet with Andrea, where he lives. And I've gotten to know Andrea really well in the last 4 or 5 years since he did the first investment. He is a visionary in how sports media is evolving, more than almost anyone I've talked to in the last decade. And from the beginning, he and I talked about the fact that if you think about the two companies together in 4 dimensions, content, they have live sports, we don't.
Yep.
There's a lot of wraparound content you can create from live sports or an event that we would love to have access to. We're doing it right now, actually, at Leeds. Before the match, after the match, the week before the match, what are the players eating? What do they listen to when they get their headphones on walking in the stadium? All that background lifestyle stuff. Right. We have a ton of social media content, short form. We also have some long form, but a lot of sports lifestyle and broader entertainment content. He also believes that sports and entertainment are going to become a very blurry line, but in a good way. So the content is amazingly, I think, synergistic. Secondly, the distribution of that content. They have linear in 10 countries in Europe and Asia. We have, and they have some digital. We have social everywhere, except for China right now, but everywhere. And they have, and we have a little digital. So together, and when I say digital, I mean non-social, but non-linear. So all the stuff in between it, from OTT to websites and all that. From an audience perspective, they have, 35 to 60-year-olds. We have 13 to 25-year-olds, roughly. So we have the full age spectrum of audience, which no sports media company today has. And then from a revenue perspective, they have long-term, predictable, rights agreement-driven contracts. We have 7 other revenue streams, from digital advertising to branded content to merch sales to event ticket sales. Except there's a portion of our business that does B2B. We run the Premier League's YouTube channel, for example. So we have some B2B revenue. So the revenues just really complement each other. And so when you put that all together, there's no other company that I'm aware of that will be at the scale that we're at anytime soon globally. So like that was really the business side of what drove it. To your question on the investor side, we merged the stock of the two companies. Right. At some point down the road, we'll probably go public. But all our investors are in this with now Andrea and his investors. Right. Because I think people see that vision. And I had to call all 187 of our investors and let them know that we're doing this. And the support I got was tremendous.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
Yeah. From a personal perspective, I want to work with Andrea. I mean, he's just a really high energy, passionate, smart entrepreneur who has, the Midas touch. I mean, the guy has done
it's done very well. Yeah, I know Andrea for probably 20 years. When he first started out here in Asia, we sort of started around the same time. So yeah, we're good friends, and we've crossed the paths many times here in Asia, as well as of course at the Sportels of the world. Doing his MP Silva days and everything else. So yeah, absolutely. Greatest respect there of what he's achieved and what he's building still now on the back of his, I guess, big exit he had there, a few years ago. Yep. So look, that makes sense. Yeah, that's why I was curious. What is the combo there? But that just makes total sense. And on the back of it, I can see this is a very interesting and attractive business to either take public or, of course, for other even larger media entities one day to have a look at this. So, well done there. That sounds exciting.
We've been approached over the years by some of the major sports media companies.
I think so.
And I just didn't feel like. I just felt like we'd be acquired and then get lost in the bureaucracy of that company. I didn't feel like they would see the vision and really want to. They want to do what we want to do.
I want just again, this is public out there, so I'm not giving you a secret, but I think I see or what I read is the 11 sport group together with you guys now. It's about 300 million in revenue with 300 people across U.S., Europe, Asia. So it's a good size business there, and it looks like many more things to come in the future though. So I look forward to seeing more of you guys here in Asia. And maybe there's some things we can help you with as well. Now, one thing I have a couple of more questions here just to kind of wrap it up. One is obviously the world of gaming and esports. I haven't really heard that yet as much in your and when you're talking about traditional sports and many other things. Is it on your radar? Or is it something you guys are already doing? Are you working with stuff with these influencers as well, or not yet?
Yeah, first of all, I'm a huge believer that is going to be a huge component overall of sport, however you define it globally, just given that this young generation, how much of their lives it consumes. I think, we're already in it but in a slightly different way. So we have about 25 professional gamers that are in our network, but we don't do the live events. We do their lifestyles. So they'll post videos for us. We will send production crews out to, increasingly more now, post-COVID, production crews out to sort of film what it's like to be the life of one of these folks. And it's a small but very growing piece of what Whistle's doing. I know that 11 also has interest in getting into that as well. So with their abilities, we may get into a little bit of the live piece of it, but it's a super exciting area for us.
I would imagine that it seems such a natural space, right? Especially if you think of the scale of these influences, right? If you look at what Ninja and these guys are doing, it's just off the chart.
It's enormous.
They're as big as anyone out there in the world right now, and their earning capacity, goes with it too. So, and that's partly what we're doing here. We're building a bit like some of the stuff you guys are doing. Actually, we're doing right now in the gaming space. So I'd love to, we'll have another chat on that, maybe to compare some notes and learn some of the things you guys are doing there. sure. But to kind of nicely wrap it up here, we're almost hitting the hour here, which is great. We're nice on time. You mentioned it earlier. You studied at Harvard, but you didn't just study and then left and sort of have that degree sitting somewhere on your desk. You're very actively involved there, right? You're in the Harvard Alumni Network or Association there. What I've saw, at least, you have many roles over the last, 10 years, I guess. And you're currently even the president, I guess, of the Alumni Association. So, it's the obvious why you would do it. I don't want to just even ask the obvious, but how do you leverage? How do you use it, or what is it? What is mostly in there for you? Is it just networking with fellow Harvard grads, or is it really business related, or everything in between?
Yeah, interesting question. So I went to Harvard Business School, and Harvard Business School is a pretty isolated part of Harvard University. Harvard University has 11 graduate schools in the undergrad and Radcliffe. Right. There's just a tremendously diverse and interesting place. And and the business school is actually across a river. It's very kind of physically isolated, although that's changing. But so I didn't do anything with any alumni for 10 years after I graduated. And then I got a random email right as I decided to leave the company I sold my second company to. And so I had a little time, and the email was, "Hey, come join the board," basically. And so I got involved in this board, and it's like 3 days. There's 3 board meetings a year. They're a couple of days long each. So it's not a huge time commitment. And what I've found over 11 years of being on the board, and then a year ago, I was elected president, which is a volunteer 1-year term, a little more time, but this was a unique year. I didn't go to any meetings. I was on a lot of Zoom calls. Very similar to what happened when I got an engineering degree and then I didn't have any business friends. Now, when I got at HBS, most of my friends were business friends, and I didn't really have a lot of diversity in my conversations. And what I found is just a really diverse group of people who are doctors and lawyers and faculty members and from all different walks of life. And it was energizing to me. I would go to one of these meetings and I have an idea that come in my head that I could apply to my business that I would never have gotten if I didn't sit in this meeting and talk to someone who knew nothing about business or either one of my companies. So it's been personally rewarding to me, and it's been a really amazing group of friendships that I've gotten out of it. And I live in Cambridge, so it's not that far of a
you're in the neighborhood.
Go a mile down the road. So it really was. It's been rewarding, and I tell my wife that sort of 3 parts of my life are my wife and my children, my business, and then Harvard has been a big part. It's going to decrease a lot.
Interesting, because I literally would say the same too. I'm a YPO member, and you might know a bit about it because I think
I do,
CEO is a YPO as well, right? Michael is, and that in some sense, it's that the network it is similar, right? It's a huge global network of CEOs and entrepreneurs, and the learning is amazing. Networking, of course, and sometimes there's a business opportunity to it, but it is not even meant for that, right? It's not even, you're not supposed to solicit each other for business, but it's just you can ask anyone any time of the day a question, or if you got a problem, or you're looking for a particular contact in the city you're flying into or whatever, they're there, right? And that's amazing. Right. And I'm sure Harvard has probably something similar like that. So it's very powerful.
I think there's value when you're an entrepreneur, as you know, you're so hyper focused on one thing all the time, 24/7. Yep. And it's just good to have a couple days every few months where you have to shut that off, which is hard, but you have to shut that off and just open your mind to other ideas. And again, I've gotten so much more out of it than I've given. And from what Michael explains to me, the YPO is very, very similar. He comes away from the meetings he goes to with just tremendous contacts and network, of course, but probably as important, just out of the box, different ideas that you can then bring back and apply to your business.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, great. Well, I had a fellow Harvard alumni with Dr. Marcus Elliott on the podcast, last year, I think. He does applied sports science. Unbelievable, man. Incredible podcast. It was one of those podcasts that blew me away, his stories and what he's doing there. So I'm not sure you ever come across each other there, but he's a good one to reach out to as well.
I'll look him up.
Yeah, definitely. I'll I'll connect you. But John, thank you very much for your time here. I really enjoyed this. I know so much more about it. I learned a ton of things. I have about a page and a half of scribbles here of taking notes of the things you were telling, and I'm certain others will as well, because what you're doing, again, I think is very relatable for many parts of the world. Obviously, you've done it extremely successful from the US and now going global. But people in other parts of the world who are doing things like this already, whether they can partner with you or again, trying to do something in their own language in their own country. I think there is so much similarities, and I have no doubt people will learn from our conversation here. So I really thank you for that, and wish you a great day there in Boston or in Cambridge.
Well, Marcus, thank you very much. It's you don't get a chance to talk about yourself much being an entrepreneur, so it's definitely interesting for me. And I'm a huge fan, and look forward to meeting you in person. Hopefully, it's Sportel, or if not sooner.
Definitely, yeah, that'll be fun. We'll definitely catch up soon.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.